So, Kyle, I want to hear your thoughts on Chris Paul joining the Golden State Warriors.
Well, for me, when I look at Chris Paul, this is probably his last chance of legitimately trying to get an NBA title within his career. Kev, he's almost been in the league for 20 years at this point. And there have been times where Chris Paul has been close in achieving some sort of shot to win an NBA Finals, yet that has not happened. Unfortunately, every single chance that they've made a deep playoff run where Chris Paul has been a part of a team that he's been on, unfortunately, it has not ended in success for Chris Paul. But when I look at what Chris Paul has with the situation in Golden State right now, this is going to be pretty much what I consider is his last best shot to get one. Because, I mean, like Kev said in the lead up, Chris Paul is in his late 30s. He's 38 years old. And we're not talking about Chris Paul in a sense where he's in the prime of his career like he was when he was a member of the Los Angeles Clippers. I mean, that was pretty much peak Chris Paul back in the day. That's no longer the case here. And even though that I think that Chris Paul could still be a viable player for Golden State going into next year, I think there's a few factors that you have to kind of keep in mind when it comes to Chris Paul is how long is he going to be able to play for and how effective is he going to be when it comes to his overall shooting. Chris Paul has always been a good scorer as far as I see it. And when it comes to him running the point guard position, he is somebody that is basically considered a prototypical point guard as far as just his ability to be able to run the floor effectively as a floor general. But you could tell over the last couple of years that he's definitely had a drop off in his overall productivity. And it's just coming with age and attrition. At some point, the minutes are just going to get to you. And there were times when Phoenix was making their playoff run this year where they unfortunately fell short in claiming an NBA title. There were times where Chris Paul was open for some jump shots. And Chris Paul has made a huge living off of knocking down some mid-range jumpers, knocking down some big-time threes. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to cash in on some of those looks that he was provided with in this playoff run, this most recent playoff run for Phoenix this past year. Now, when it comes to Chris Paul, the interesting thing that I'm going to see it with him going into next year is what sort of role is he going to be in? Is he going to be the starting point guard for the Golden State Warriors? Is he going to come off the bench? That's going to be something that Steve Kerr is going to have to work on this offseason and try to figure out what the best rotation that Golden State's going to run with their starting five is going to be. There could be a situation where Chris Paul runs the point guard and Steph plays the two. Now, depending on what happens with Draymond Green, it could be a pretty advantageous situation for Chris Paul if they run a high pick and roll with Chris Paul and Draymond Green. That means that Steph and Clay are going to be open on the wing somewhere, being able to knock down some three-point shots potentially. But who knows? Maybe Steve Kerr will switch things up and bring Chris Paul off the bench. I don't know if Chris Paul is going to settle for that, but it could just be the personnel decision that Steve Kerr is going to have to make. So when it comes to Chris Paul, I think that Chris Paul is still going to have a relatively decent year with Golden State next year, barring some sort of injury, some sort of significant injury as far as I see it. But this pretty much tells me that, with them moving off of Jordan Poole in this trade and bringing Chris Paul into the fold, it looks like Golden State is really putting their focus on trying to retain Draymond Green. And it really kind of came down to who's it going to be for the long term. It was either going to be Jordan Poole or Draymond Green. Well, now we have our answer. With Jordan Poole going to the Washington Wizards, I think this pretty much guarantees that they're going to go after Draymond and they're going to try to bring him back on some sort of deal. I don't know if they're going to give everything that Draymond wants, because Draymond could ask for a 3 to 4 year deal. He could still ask for well over $150 million in a contract. I don't know if that's something that he'll get, but nonetheless, I think that's what Draymond is going to try to secure this offseason. Now, Golden State may give that to him. I don't know about the price point, though. The price point may be a little bit different, but I think it pretty much guarantees that the Warriors are going to try to lock in and try to get Draymond back into the fold, and then maybe try to make some other moves this offseason to bolster their bench depth. So overall, I'm not really sold on this Chris Paul trade just because, like Kev said, you're dealing with somebody who's in their late 30s, almost at late 40s. Jesus. He's almost 40. But nonetheless, if Chris Paul can be effective going into next year with Golden State, and as long as everybody stays relatively healthy, I still think that Golden State will be a relatively competitive team in the Western Conference next year. They made it to the second round of the playoffs this year. They got knocked out by the Lakers. They were coming off an NBA championship the year before, and you could still look at somebody like Steph Curry, who's still playing at an elite level despite him being in his mid-30s. So overall, I'm still a little bit hesitant on how well this Chris Paul trade is going to work out. It's just I think that the bigger takeaway is with Golden State moving off of Jordan Poole, they're going to focus on Draymond to try to bring him back into the fold with some sort of contract extension this offseason. That's really how I see this whole situation with Chris Paul going to Golden State and Jordan Poole going to Washington. So, Kev, I'll kick it to you from here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at the contracts here, trying to see the comparisons of who's going to make what and, is Golden State saving money? And it looks to me like Golden State is actually spending a little bit more money. So the base salary for Jordan Poole's contract is listed at $27 million this year, and Chris Paul is slated to make just a little bit under $31 million. So you spend more money, give up capital, and get older. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Jordan Poole is some elite defender or anything like that, because we all know that there were plenty of instances, not just in this playoff run, but in previous exchanges in different games of the year where Jordan Poole plays little to no defense whatsoever. So maybe Chris Paul gives you a little bit more grit. He gives you that veteran leadership that you already have with Steph, Clay, and Draymond. I mean, Chris is known to be very vocal. Chris is known to be a great leader and role model for a lot of younger players. Maybe a pass-first point guard would be beneficial for Golden State so that Steph and Clay can focus on just getting shots up and altering defenses. That might bode well for some of the big men. That might get some of the younger players involved, like Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, who's been circling around a couple of trade rumors. Who knows? Kyle also made the point of potentially moving him off the bench. At this age, I feel like Chris Paul has to do whatever it takes to win if you really want a championship. You are well past the point of being picky, of trying to say, well, I demand to be a starter. My man, at the end of the day, this is a franchise that has won 4 championships in the last decade, and you have won 0 in 20 years. So I'm going to need you to take a step back because you're no longer the point god that you were when you were in LA, in New Orleans, and so on and so forth. You're now a veteran leader that is making upwards of $30+ million. They brought you in for a reason. Clearly, they see something of value to you because they could have left you to disappear in Washington. But it also makes me laugh because I'm assuming Golden State was the only team willing to give up 2 first-round picks for him because the Clippers and Lakers were rumored to go after Chris. But it just seems like the Warriors were willing to give up enough. So Mike Dunleavy makes his first big splash as the GM of the Warriors. Obviously, we know that, oh my God, I'm going to forget his name. I know it's Bob Myers. I'm sitting here like it's not Jacob Myers. Bob Myers takes a step back and resigns, and he no longer is the GM. I agree with Kyle. This is a focus mainly to retain Draymond. I mean, we saw that there were some issues on the sideline, even some visible disgruntled conversations on the floor between Poole and Draymond. Not to justify what Draymond did whatsoever. It was very toxic behavior, very inappropriate, but it seemed like Jordan was carrying that through the year, and in instances, communication and friction was existing and visibly for the media to see, both on the court and off. So it is what it is in that regard. Draymond is the glue to this team, and he just does so much. Personally, I said this to Kyle during the playoffs, the performance that Jordan Poole put out this year in the playoffs is the reason why he got cut or traded. Because I guarantee you, if he was doing something similar to what they did the year prior when they won the championship or putting up better numbers, this would not have been a conversation. I guarantee you they would have retained both and would have had a conversation with Draymond and Jordan to say, listen, we need you both to win, put this behind you. Whatever has to happen behind closed doors, do it. You're both grown men. It is what it is. But Jordan Poole played so bad. And I mean like so inefficient to where he was having under 30% shooting nights. And again, doesn't play defense, was having those on-the-court issues with Draymond and other teammates. So it was bound to happen. I didn't think he would get sent to Siberia, or I guess what I would call the garage sale that is Washington. But hey, now you can go put up 30 shots in front of all the baddies in the D.C. area without any limitations, and that's going to be your team. So have at it. Have a good time. I don't know what Chris Paul is going to do. There are options. He presents different packages, different sets on the offense, but they brought a veteran in nonetheless, and it's just a matter of how Steve Kerr's going to use him. So, I mean, I can't even say kudos to the Warriors because I don't even know if this is a good trade, but it happened.